Just to kick us off, we have the Department of Energy Resources Commissioner Elizabeth Mahoney and Liz Anderson, who leads the Energy and Ratepayer Advocacy Division at the Attorney General's Office, here to deliver opening remarks. So I'm going to turn it over first to Commissioner Mahoney.
Thanks, Austin. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Having these public listening sessions is critical to helping us understand the full breadth of issues that we're trying to tackle and the available solutions. So welcome to the Interagency Rates Working Group. The group represents a collaboration of the Department of Energy Resources, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and the Attorney General's Office. And the working group is dedicated to advance near and long-term rate designs that is aligned with the Commonwealth's decarbonization goals. I know many of you are working on these issues, and oftentimes the issues that we're going to talk about today pop up in various issues that are separated from one another, that they're in silos. And so what the IRWG is trying to do is take a look at the broad picture of all of our efforts to build clean energy, to decarbonize, and to focus on equity and affordability as we work through these goals, and trying to be at the intersection of our goals and our rate making pathways. So we recognize that current electric rates are high in the Commonwealth, and we know that that jeopardizes the successful deployment of home electrification technologies like air source heat pumps and electric vehicles. The rate study and the IRWG's recommendations will prioritize an equitable reduction in energy burden to promote the electrification of the building and transportation sectors. I will note, of course, that what we're talking about tonight and throughout the stakeholder process for the IRWG cannot comprehensively bring into the picture everything that's going on. Certainly tonight, you're going to hear a broad overview of the work of the working group, but that does not represent everything that this working group is working through, identifying, and solutions, problem solving. But we certainly are looking to you to make sure you're highlighting issues that we should not leave behind as the IRWG gets to work. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Liz Anderson from the Attorney General's Office, and she's going to speak to the AGO's support for this IRWG process and work, and briefly discuss the need for a comprehensive look at rates and rate design in a way that supports load management and provides customers with a suite of options. Liz, thank you for working with us on this group, and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mahoney and Austin. Hi, everyone. As Austin said at the beginning, I'm the Chief of the Energy and Ratepayer Advocacy Division at the Attorney General's Office. Our division is the ratepayer advocate for Massachusetts ratepayers. And in that role, we work really hard to advocate for a cost-effective and equitable clean energy transition. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in this public listening session. I am looking forward to hearing more about the work of the Interagency Rates Working Group from DOER and E3, and to hear from stakeholders and members of the public as well. The Attorney General's Office appreciates the opportunity to collaborate with Mass CEC, DOER, and the administration on this important effort to take a comprehensive look at rates and to develop recommendations for both near-term and long-term rate design. This effort is especially timely, as ratepayers are aware costs for electricity just continue to increase year over year. The agency that regulates the electric utilities, the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, has also expressed concerns about the affordability of energy bills for households in the Commonwealth, and recently opened a proceeding to consider improvements to energy affordability programs. That proceeding is docketed at DPU 24-15. The Attorney General's Office appreciates the attention across Massachusetts state agencies to the energy burden of ratepayers and particularly the attention to the energy burden of low and moderate income and vulnerable ratepayers. We see the working group's efforts to make recommendations on near-term and long-term rate design as a key way to support achievement of the Commonwealth's electrification goals and emission reduction mandates in a cost-effective way. In particular, our office is eager to work with stakeholders to design rates to support load management, which we believe should help contain or delay infrastructure costs that will be paid for by all ratepayers. Our office also supports designing rates to provide customers with a host of options that suit their diverse needs and preferences. This examination of potential rate designs for different customers and customer use cases should provide customers with more choices and should allow customers to be more actively involved in managing their own electricity use and helping to manage their overall costs. As you can probably tell, we see rate design as a significantly important tool to help manage costs as we transition to a clean energy future. We look forward to continuing this critical work with the Interagency Rates Working Group, and we look forward to hearing from interested members of the public tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you to both Commissioner Mahoney and Liz Anderson. My name is Austin Dawson, and I work at the Department of Energy Resources and have had the immense pleasure of working with both staff and leadership from the many member agencies you see on the screen here within the Interagency Rates Working Group. Today's listening session will provide an overview of the purpose and scope of the rate design. And while you will hear from us about this work, we also want to hear from you today about and in the future. Stakeholder engagement is critical to the development of a comprehensive study and effective recommendations. The Commonwealth's clean energy goals emphasize building and transportation electrification, and current electric rates in Massachusetts jeopardize the scale and pace of the necessary transformation to meet the Commonwealth's climate mandates. The Interagency Rate Working Group includes representatives from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, the Department of Energy Resources, as well as the Attorney General's Office. And as Commissioner Mahoney pointed out, it was formed to advance near and long-term electric rate designs that align with the Commonwealth's decarbonization goals and prioritize an equitable approach to energy burden in incentivizing technologies to transform the building and transportation sectors. My colleague, Sarah Cullinan, with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, will provide further details about the IRWG's scope of work and identified rate design priorities.
Thank you, Austin. So the scope of work that the IRWG developed together includes three primary areas of focus. We kind of roughly think about them in terms of timeframes from current state to the near future, and then after that, the longer term future. So first, the first part of our scope focuses on looking at the current and kind of recent past history of rates in Massachusetts, including the framework and rules by which those rates are set at the DPU. Part of this work is also looking at alternative ways to design electric rates that are used in other jurisdictions and that might be good potential options for Massachusetts. The next two parts of the scope are kind of roughly delineated based on the availability of advanced metering technology, or AMI, but along with that implementation of AMI over that kind of medium term, a lot of other kind of aspects of the electric system will change as well. Just now, the utilities, including the investor-owned utilities, as well as some MLPs, are currently rolling out and installing AMI technology. Some parts of the Commonwealth already have it, but when it is broadly available, it will provide the data that we need to know on a more granular level when households use electricity, and it will provide more options for rate design. However, before AMI is available in that very near term, and before other parts of the energy system change in concert with that, we're focused on identifying a very short-term way to address electric rate challenges faced by earlier adopters of electrification, such as those who have or are thinking about currently installing air source heat pumps. So people in that group well know that there's a disincentive to electrify home energy uses because of high electric rates. This analysis of that near term is intended to provide options that we can put into place right now, relatively immediately. It would be a near term proposal to the DPU that would provide those near-term solutions, some near-term solution for high rates. And then as we look in the further out, longer term, when AMI is available, at the longer term is characterized by when AMI is available, but it's also kind of representative of that longer term future in which we are in kind of our decarbonized state in Massachusetts. And so that long-term study is ultimately looking at how do we achieve equitable and affordable electric rates in that future state. And then, like I mentioned before, in that longer term, we'll start to look at things like time varying rates, kind of additional options that are on the table when we have better meters available. Next slide. So as a working group, we identified a set of key priorities that we will be keeping in mind and be at the center of the work that we're doing in this study. There are 4 of them. First is to reduce energy burden while supporting and advancing electrification. Energy burden, for those who might not be familiar with the term, refers to the total proportion of a household's income that's spent on energy, and it includes both electricity and fuels. Second of these priorities is to promote the addition of distributed energy resources, DERs, to the system. DERs, examples of which are solar and battery storage, are key to decarbonizing the electric sector, but they also provide other benefits in terms of electricity resilience and efficiency and flexibility in operating the electric system. Third of our priorities is to identify and promote the least cost pathway to modernizing and readying our electric system. Distribution system here refers to the poles, wires, substations, transformers, basically all infrastructure that's needed to get electricity to homes and businesses. This priority speaks more to how the utilities are compensated for building, maintaining, and operating the electric system. Last of these priorities, and they're not ranked here, these are all the priorities, is to promote efficiency in the system, which can be achieved by shifting electricity use around in time, to more low impacts parts of the day. Something we also call peak reduction. System efficiency also improves affordability outcomes. We also note here additional necessary objectives for a future electric system, including reliability, resilience, and system communications. We'll now pass it off to Austin to talk about the timeline for our study.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. So certainly, I think this work for many of the stakeholders has felt a long time coming, and the IRWG has been working diligently starting late last year. And so what I'm going to share here on this slide is the expected timeline for how we anticipate the future work that Sarah just covered to kind of roll out throughout the year, but also to flag additional stakeholder sessions and opportunities for engagement and input. So as it stands, this session will provide an opportunity for stakeholders to provide comments and feedback on the purpose and scope of the study. And in a moment, the E3 team will provide a presentation that will speak to their progress on the electric rates assessment and the energy expenditure analysis. Then the IRWG expects to release a near-term rate strategy report informed in part by the stakeholder engagement and input in late summer, and a long-term rate-making study report, again informed by stakeholder engagement in late fall. The IRWG intends to make final recommendations by the end of the year and is committed to this process and its outcomes to be helpful and additive to the Commonwealth's work on electric rate designs, as well as being actionable. Following the opportunity for public comment today, I'll also describe further opportunities for stakeholder engagement going forward. And so for now, I'm going to turn it over to the E3 team to provide further detail on the rate design study and context. And we'll just ask that folks hold their questions and comments to the end so that I can click the stop recording button and we don't need to, we won't capture your comments on recording. Thank you so much, and off to the E3 team.
Great, thanks, Austin. Just to start by introducing myself, I'm Andrew D. Benedictus. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a director with E3 working out of our Boston office. As Austin said, we are going to share a bit about the study context and basically how we're approaching things in order to kind of dive in on this whole rate design study. So you'll be hearing a bit from me and then a bit from my colleague Bhavan Malkani as we go through this today. Just to start, I'm going to introduce y'all to E3 in case you are unfamiliar with us. We are a clean energy transition focused consulting firm of about 110 consultants spread across our 4 main offices. As you can see, one of those is right here in Boston. And Bhavan and I both work out of that one, so we're excited to be working on this important topic right in our backyard here. Down in the left corner, you'll see that as a company we execute about 300 projects a year, and one thing that we think is really valuable is that those projects are spread pretty evenly across different client types. So, utilities and system operators, about a third of our work, investors, developers, asset owners, another fraction, and then work like this for public or nonprofit clients being another, about third. So we really intentionally try to keep our balance like that because we think that sort of 360 view of the players in the energy sector gives us really valuable comprehension of how different people are viewing these same problems and an understanding of basically how we can sort of work to solutions that involve everyone instead of just focusing on one group and one group alone's priorities. On the right hand side of that little figure, you'll see a short list of example projects that we think are relevant to this one, certainly not a comprehensive list, and not a list that I'm going to talk through in any detail right now, but just a few examples thrown up there to show, we've got local experience here in Massachusetts that we'll be drawing from. We've got experience in California and elsewhere where, there's a push for rate design that considers electrification and improves affordability, just like what we're trying to do here. And also, just pointing to some other work that we do in the northeast part of the country, thinking about building electrification in the context of cold climates and how that impacts customers. So going to our next slide, this is just an overview of what Bhavan and I will be talking about over the next half hour or so. So in terms of context, we'll be starting out talking through just what is the state thinking about decarbonization and how does electrification play a role in that. From there, we'll talk about energy affordability in the context of that electrification. And then to kind of understand that in more detail, we'll take a bit of an aside to talk through the structure of electric rates here in Massachusetts today, understanding both the costs to serve customers and how utilities recover those costs through rates. That will sort of bring us back around to revisit the key research objectives that Sarah already touched on. So we'll talk through those again in some detail, and then head into basically a little bit more on how we are thinking about this problem, right? So how we're thinking about alternative rate structures that differ from what we've got today that might help us accomplish some of our goals. So Vivaan will be talking through that part, and then he'll also share a bit about basically the modeling framework that we're using to approach this study and to evaluate these alternative rate designs. So diving right in on the context here, Massachusetts, like many other progressive states, has pretty aggressive climate goals that will be playing out over the next decades. And these goals are detailed in a plan known as the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So that's a published document that you can look up if you're not familiar with it. And we've grabbed this top figure in this slide from that plan to highlight the key pillars of decarbonization that are laid out in that plan. And these pillars are pretty common across states that are planning for decarbonization. So not especially unique to Massachusetts. But we aren't going to talk through all of these pillars here, but want to highlight the leftmost one here, which is just end-use energy and moving end-use energy away from fossil fuel consumption. And in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, or CECP, here in Massachusetts, just like in plans similar to it across the country, the sort of most important piece of that transition away from fossil fuel use into end uses is electrification. And so we see in the bottom two figures here, basically a piece on the left showing the actual adoption of both light duty vehicles and of electric heat pumps in the state. And then on the right hand side of each figure, the 2030 goal based on the Clean Energy Climate Plan. So a couple things should jump out to you here. One is just that we've got a long way to go between where we are today, or at least based on this figure, where we were in 2022, and where we're headed in order to accomplish the decarbonization goals of the state. And rates are, in fact, a piece of that. There's a lot of state policy that will be working to promote adoption, but one of the pieces that's important to that is that you want folks to see favorable economics after adopting something like this, right? We want folks to be able to adopt and see rates as part of the reason to adopt and not a barrier to it. On top of that, the other thing to point out is just the sheer magnitude of where we're headed. So even these 2030 numbers show a lot of adoption. That's something like 900,000 EVs in the state and 500,000 heat pumps by 2030. And these are just the 2030 targets. The numbers increase after that for what we need to be doing in order to hit our state climate goals. So the sort of short explanation, or not explanation, but the short takeaway from that is that electrification is coming, right? These things are happening. The state's going to be doing what it can to promote adoption of these technologies. And that means they're going to be in a lot of homes, in a lot of driveways, and we need to be prepared to understand what impact that will have on customers throughout the state, sort of before they're here, right? We want to understand that now so that while there are fewer people impacted, we can we can make things work how we think they ought to be working, instead of getting sort of getting caught once there's already a lot of adoption out there. So in order to start to understand that, we can go to the next slide and look at a very simplistic model that we developed just to get like the very first high level view of things. So what we're showing on the right hand side of this slide is the result of the simplified illustrative model, where we've basically just calculated energy expenditures for an average residential customer. And that average is taken sort of across statewide, multifamily, single family units, just simplified down to a single average energy usage. So obviously a huge simplification, and we'll talk to why this only tells us so much later when Bhavan is speaking. But it is helpful just to sort of get across our first points here. Just talking through the figure a little bit to understand it, we have things broken down on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side into whether a customer is paying electric rates based on MLP, so municipal light plant rates, or EDC rates. EDC being electric distribution company, so those are the investor-owned utilities in the state, Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil. And within each of those sort of sub-panels, we've got a set of two bars. The one on the left-hand side showing a non-electrified customer, so consumption and therefore cost coming from electricity consumption, natural gas consumption, and gasoline. And then the right-hand bar, we've electrified everything, right? So we've taken that gasoline car and flipped it over to an EV. We've taken that natural gas furnace, that natural gas water heater, flipped that over to a heat pump water heater and a heat pump for home heating, cooling. And so all of the usage then is electricity, and we just do a simple recalculation of the bill based on that average MLP or EDC rate. I think there are two things that we notice right away here. One is that in the left-hand side of the figure, we do actually see a bill decrease given the MLP rates, and we'll speak in a few slides to the fact that those do tend to be lower and some of the reasons why that's the case. And then on the right-hand side, we see that for an average EDC electric rate, we're seeing a bill increase when a customer electrifies. I'll note here also that it's not just the after electrification rate that we're concerned with. I think visiting this topic of rate design is sort of spurred now by the need to electrify and by looking at customer economics under electrification. But another driving factor, and a very important one that you heard folks mention in the introduction, is just energy affordability across the state at large. Right. So even for the non-electrified customers, we do want to be thinking about the fact that these rates are high. Massachusetts has some of the highest rates in the country. And so we want to be thinking about ways that we can make electric rate design lead to more affordable bills for everyone, but especially for the low-income folks in the state. So we sort of see this as our motivating chart, at least to start things out, right? Our rates are high, and on top of that, for all the EDC customers, if folks are electrifying, they're going to be seeing a bill increase, which is not what we want to see. We want our rate, our dollar signals that customers see to be aligned with state policy goals. And right now we've got just the opposite of that here. So we can go to the next slide and start to understand just what is going into our rates. I think before starting to talk about rate redesign, it's important to just step back and view rates sort of fundamentally and understand what costs they are built to recover. So we have a few slides here where we'll walk through basically just the cost that it takes to serve a customer. And then, having built that understanding, then we can talk a bit more about actually how we recover those costs. So the buildup that we're showing here is for an example customer, about 600 kilowatt hours per month. So I think a very similar customer to the example that we were looking at in the last slide. And this total bill of $215 and the breakdown of components of the bill is based on an Eversource customer. So that might not look exactly like your usage. It might not be your utility, but regardless, these are the general categories that are, the costs that that are recovered through rates. And so the sort of relative amounts of one or the other might change slightly, but this should still hold pretty true on a fractional basis. So the first component here is supply. Supply is basically just the cost of procuring kilowatt hours. So we can think of this as just the cost of going out and basically buying kilowatt hours produced by a generator, because we know that we need those kilowatt hours to then go and serve a customer. So just that supply cost alone is about half of the bill here. But that's not the whole story, because you don't just buy the kilowatt hours, then we have to figure out how to get them to the customer. And so that's where these next buckets come in, the first of which being transmission. So this, you can kind of picture the large transmission towers and big power lines that you'll see sometimes running alongside the highway. Transmission lines are the ones that get the power, get the kilowatt hours from the generators over to the cities and towns, getting them out to the consumer. The building and the upkeep of those lines takes, some amount of money, and so that cost is recovered through the transmission charge. Very similar is the distribution charge. So once we get power through the transmission lines, then we have to get power actually out to each individual home and business. So these are the poles and wires that you see when you look out the window. And very similar to the transmission system, just at smaller scale. This system, the upkeep of it, the operations of it, and building new connections requires some investment, and so that's what's covered by the distribution part of the bill. And so now we've covered basically how we get a kilowatt hour bought and how we bring it all the way to the home or the business. But on top of that, there's one last category, which is the public policy category, and this is how we fund actually a lot of public programs. So, excuse me. So energy efficiency programs, low-income bill assistance, sometimes incentives to promote new and upcoming technology are funded through pots of money that are collected in rates and then redistributed out to these causes. And so in Massachusetts, we have a good amount of these public policy costs because we're funding a lot of efficiency. We're doing what we can to help low-income folks, and we're trying to push new technologies that we see as vital for the energy transition. So that's another significant fraction of the cost there. So to provide a customer with power, we have to collect all of those costs. And the way that we collect those costs is, of course, through electric rates. So starting on the figure here, we'll get back up to the text in a minute, but we did, with the state at the start of this project, a quick survey of electric rates across the state. And what we're showing in this figure are the results of that, broken down in a way that I'll explain in a moment. But again, we're looking at sort of this average residential customer here, 600 kilowatt hours a month. And what we're showing with each bar is the bill per month for that customer. I would point out a couple of things immediately when we look at this chart. The first one is just the very wide range of bills that customers can see depending on where they're located and who provides their service. Ranging from something like $250 down to below $100 for the same amount of consumption per month. the sort of sharpest line drawn between groups here is between the EDCs and the MLPs. So the EDCs, you can see the 4 bars at the left of the figure, all of them totaling over 200, and then the EDCs, the MLPs across the board at or below $150 a month. And there are a few reasons for that aren't the main point of what we're talking about right now, but it's such an obvious thing looking at the figure that I think we'd be remiss not to mention it. So main factors there, I think probably the biggest one is just that MLPs tend to serve smaller, less diverse and more dense customer bases. So when you're serving just a specific area, your infrastructure to serve that smaller area isn't so expensive. You might not be dealing with as much sort of maintenance of lines out in like the rural areas and whatnot as you're transporting power across large spaces to more like rural grids. And because you're working in these sort of simpler, denser areas, you just don't need as much infrastructure. And alongside that, you don't need as much overhead in terms of things like staffing to make sure everything's running and whatnot also. So that's one big difference. I know another is that MLPs, some of them receive some amount of federally subsidized hydropower, some of that coming in from New York, so that sometimes lowers the supply prices that we see. And I think on top of that, it's also worth noting that the EDCs are investor owned, and so there is a part of their revenue that goes back to investors, right? So they have a regulated return that sort of is on top of their operating costs that's collected in rates as well. And MLPs, being public entities, don't have that same extra collection. So there's that initial difference between the two groups that's worth pointing out. But the other piece that I certainly want to point out here, and that we'll dig into in some of the following slides, is that regardless of what utility you're in, almost all of your costs or almost all of your bill is coming in through the volumetric charge and not the fixed charge. So when we say the volumetric charge, that is $1 per kilowatt hour charge, right? So you use another kilowatt hour of energy, you pay some amount of money for that. The other side of that, highlighted in red in each of these bars, is the fixed charge, and that is just a simple $1 per month charge connected to the system. There are historical reasons for the volumetric charge being how we collect most of our costs. I think historically and even somewhat today, a lot of the electrical system costs were driven by fossil fuels, and so you wanted to have a volumetric cost to reflect the fact that for every kilowatt hour you're providing, that meant that you were combusting some amount of fossil fuel that you had to pay for also on a volumetric basis, right? So gallons of oil, cubic feet of natural gas, right? All of that purchased on a volumetric basis as an associated cost. And so it makes sense to therefore align rates to reflect that volumetric cost to serve. This is also nice because it provides a clear conservation signal to consumers, right? If folks want to save money, then you consume less energy, fewer kilowatt hours, and therefore you pay less on your bill. And that's that reflects the cost of the system and gives a clear signal to ratepayers. However, that dynamic is changing, right? Today, and certainly going into the future, our resource mix will be dominated by things like wind and solar and batteries too, where the upfront cost is nearly all of the cost of the resource. And then once the solar panels are installed, once the turbines are built, the ongoing cost is much, much cheaper. There is no fuel cost, right? The sun is free, the wind is free. And so the structure that once reflected the operations of the energy system might not be appropriate anymore as we sort of look to the grid of the future. And on top of that sort of like cost-driven concern, we are also seeing, as folks pointed out early in today's session, that we're seeing this rate design structure impede electrification goals. Because again, if you're electrifying, you're adding a lot more kilowatt hours. That means for every one of those added kilowatt hours, you're paying more if you're really structured to have these volumetric rates. So we're starting to see that, based on how the system's changing, based on what we want price signals to look like, we have rate designs that probably don't really reflect our values anymore. And that sort of brings us to what we really want to use this study to look at. So going to the next slide. And I won't spend too long on this because I know Sarah already talked through it, but I just wanted to go back over, now that we've talked through motivation, sort of where we go from here. So as Sarah said, and you see this illustrated in the bottom of the figure here, the study is really broken out in a timeline. So we have already shown today a very, very simple example of how we're looking at rates today, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? That is just an average example. And most customers are not the average customer by definition. So we're going to be spending a lot of time fleshing out examples of how things look for customers today, understand how electrification looks today, how affordability looks today. And then from there, we start to move into this more forward-looking view where we think about near-term rate reform and then further down the road, long-term rate reform. And as Sarah said, that near-term rate reform discussion is sort of bound by the constraints of what technology is available today, right now. Right, so these are rate designs that we don't want to have to wait around to make, right? We want this to be feasible given today's technology, given today's policy and regulatory environment. And so that'll be the focus of how we think about near-term rate reform. But we also want to do that thinking with an eye towards the long-term rate reform also. So as we look at long-term rate reform, we get to break down all those constraints that bind us in the near term. We get to think about a world in which we have AMI and we've had time to basically digest the data coming in from AMI and really understand how customer usage varies on an hourly basis or sub-hourly basis even. We will have the time in the long term. If we see regulatory devices that need to change, we'll have time to push for that change. Similar with policy, there'll be time to push for policy change. And so, we want to have our eyes constantly on that long-term vision, even as we do our near-term rate reform piece, because we want to make sure that any steps we take today are steps that sort of work as no regret steps towards that long-term goal or goals. And so that's how we're thinking about the phases of this study, right? We want there to be a constant thread through them from the long term back to today, but obviously, practical consideration driving how we look at things in the near term. So with that, I think I will pass it off to Vivaan, and he'll go through not just, I've sort of talked about how we're thinking about all this. He's going to talk a little bit more specifically about how we're thinking about what we can do in the near term versus the long term and how we'll assess that.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. My name is Vivaan. As Andrew mentioned, I'm a consultant with E3 working here in the Boston office and really excited to be a part of this project. So there's really two parts that I'm going to be focusing on today. The first one, as Andrew mentioned, is exploring some of the different rate design concepts that are out there, both in practice and in theory, and exploring which ones could be applicable in Massachusetts. And then the second part that I'll be covering today is how do we explore and analyze the impacts of those different rate designs on different customers across the state, and shifting away from this paradigm of looking at just the average customer impacts, just so that we understand the full distribution of impacts across different homes, across different customer types. And so I'll start with part one first. Just to go back to what Andrew's been saying with this, what he called the motivating figure. We have here today's rates. So today's rates that have a high volumetric rate structure, where if you adopt an electric device, an electric vehicle, an electric heating, an electric heat pump that provides heating and cooling, you end up consuming a lot more electric energy, a lot more kilowatt hours. And as a result, because of the high volumetric rate structure, you get penalized to a fairly large degree. And so you're then dealing with the high upfront costs of these clean devices, as well as the bill challenges of paying high electricity bills. And so what can we do about that? And next slide, please, Austin. Thank you. There's a couple of different concepts that we can explore. And just to emphasize that these are just a couple that we're highlighting today to sort of tee up the types of designs that we'll be exploring. This is by no means a comprehensive or exhaustive list of rate designs that we will be exploring. But we really just wanted to get across some key concepts that we'll be exploring, especially in the near term and the long term, given the constraints that Andrew and Sarah talked about. And so the first one I'll be focusing on is rate structures that have reduced volumetric rates. So getting at this key problem that if you have a high volumetric rate, your bill is going to skyrocket as you increase your electric energy. What are different ways in which you could implement a lower volumetric rate structure? This one is categorized in the near-term bucket, where the kinds of changes required are not as significant on the policy, regulatory, and technology front as some of the longer-term rate structures, such as time-varying rate structures, which do require AMI and do require a more significant sort of upheaval of rate design. And so before I move to the next slide, I want to draw your attention to this line at the bottom, which talks about how rate design is really not changing the total amount of revenue that a utility is collecting for providing you with electricity. It's more about changing the way in which customers pay for electricity. So it's not about changing the size of the pie. It's just how the pie is recovered, to use a clumsy metaphor. Next slide. So on this slide, I'll be focusing on this near-term option of lowering volumetric charges. So starting with the top left box, again, the goal, lowering volumetric charges, which then creates the problem of needing to recover your missing revenue from somewhere else. And so there are a couple of different flavors that can take on that we've highlighted here, and I'll walk you through each of them. The first one is not very common, especially because it sort of goes against the high marginal cost paradigm that Andrew described earlier. And that's the declining block rate structure. And you can see this clearly shown in the chart in the top right, where your y-axis is your dollar per kilowatt hour volumetric rate, and your x-axis is your consumption over the course of a month, where you have essentially two tiers, where your first tier is, say, the first 300 kilowatt hours that you consume in a month, which is priced at a higher rate. And then the next 300 kilowatt hours, if we're sticking to the 600 kilowatt hour customer, your next 300 kilowatt hour tranche, that's priced at a lower amount. And the way this would work is that the utility would recover the vast majority of its costs from the first tranche. So if you become a high volume electricity customer by following the state's mandate or the state's goals, and you adopt your electric vehicle and your electric heat pump, and your total volume of electricity consumed increases significantly, you get penalized less because of this lower tranche for all of your additional electricity usage. So that's flavor number one. And again, uncommon, but that's the underlying principle there. Flavor number two is attempting to make sure that the electric rates that ratepayers face reflect the seasonality of costs of generation and of the costs of generating and delivering electricity. And so if you look at the chart here, the shape is a lower rate in the winter and then a higher rate in the summer. And the reason for this is that today, the highest electricity costs are incurred during the summer when demand is the highest, when it's really hot outside, everyone wants to put on their air conditioning. This is when the system costs are the highest. And so what rates could look like would be to have lower winter rates and higher summer rates to correspond and map to that cost of service shape. So that's option number 2. And option number 3 is increasing fixed charges. Andrew teed up the concept of fixed charge versus volumetric rate, and your fixed charge is just your monthly minimum customer connection charge that every customer is paying, no matter what how much you're consuming. And so there's many different ways in which you could go about this. One that we've highlighted here is being considered in California, which is the income graduated fixed charge, where because it's really important to make sure that the most vulnerable communities are protected from these increased minimum monthly payments. Tethering it to income would mean that low income and environmental justice communities, for example, could pay 0 to very low fixed charges, while higher income customers that are more able to bear the costs while staying within the state's energy burden goals pay a higher fixed charge. Obviously with a wide spectrum of what that distribution could look like. But this is more just a concept that you would increase your fixed charge so that you could then lower your volumetric rate. Before we move on to the next slide, again, important to flag this note here, which is that these are all pretty different ways of that would enable you to lower your volumetric rate, but they're definitely not mutually exclusive. And to make that point, we've highlighted a rate from our neighbors here in Maine, which is an example heat pump rate that's offered only to ratepayers that have heat pumps at home, offered by Central Maine Power. And there's 2 components to it. The first is an increased fixed charge. As you can see here, they go from a roughly $20 fixed charge with their basic rate to an almost $40 fixed charge with this heat pump rate, which is a pretty substantial increase in the minimum fixed costs. But in the wintertime, they then get to enjoy a significantly reduced wintertime rate. And this is especially beneficial for heat pump customers because the wintertime is when their consumption is going to be the highest in Maine, because they want to use their heat pumps to provide heating. And so with this dramatically reduced volumetric rate, as you can see here at the bottom, it's less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour. They then don't feel the stress of heating their homes with electricity because it's less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And so that's one very effective way to reduce your volumetric rate, especially as you adopt an electric heating device. So this is the first bucket of rates that we'll be exploring in the near term. Again, just to hammer the point home, these can be achieved before AMI is more widely available. There's obviously some more significant policy and regulatory changes that will be required to enable these, but this is more within the like the next 5 years is how we're viewing this, because it doesn't require AMI. Which then leads us to the next bucket, which is the family of rate changes that do require AMI. And there's a lot happening on this slide. So I'll start by focusing on the chart in the top right. And so what we're looking at here is the shape of electric supply costs over the course of a day. The line at the bottom is today what that shape looks like, going from midnight to midnight. What is the how much does electric supply cost over the course of a day? And then what does that look like in 2030 above that? What does that look like in 2040 above that? And then finally in 2050. And one thing that should jump out to you is this very distinctive shape that emerges, which is higher costs during the evening and nighttime periods, and significantly lower costs during the daytime. And this is driven primarily by the penetration of solar energy and solar generation, where, as Andrew pointed out, you have basically no marginal cost of producing more solar, of producing solar energy and electricity from solar generation when the sun is out. And this also coincides with the state's goals because it's the cheapest and it's the cleanest energy. And so to now shift your attention back to the left, the top left box, what time varying rates attempt to achieve is aligning customer costs and aligning rates with this shape so that the rates that customers see reflect the costs of electric supply. And so what that means is there's this very strong incentive to shift your consumption away from the higher cost periods to the cheaper periods so that your bill decreases And it also benefits the society at large because that's when the costs of producing are lowest and that's when emissions are lowest. And to the extent that you aren't able to shift your consumption, it also provides a strong incentive to reduce your peak demand and to reduce your consumption during these key hours when the system is more strained. To better explain how this would look in practice, we've shared an example rate from Hawaiian Electric. It's called the Shift and Save pilot, and it's currently a pilot, but in 2025 will become the default rate in Hawaii. And the chart on the bottom right shows what it looks like over the course of a day, while the box on the left details what each tranche corresponds to. So to start with the cheapest tranche, which is the box in green, which is when the sun is out. So that's from roughly 9 a.m. to roughly 6 p.m. When the sun is out, you have a bunch of solar generation that is cheap, that is clean. That's when we want consumers to consume their electricity, and so that's why electricity is priced most cheaply during that period. The next tranche is in yellow, which is at night, which is when electricity generation relies more on fossil fuels. The costs of generation are higher. It's dirtier electricity in that there's more emissions associated with that electricity. And so pricing it higher provides this incentive to shift consumption away towards the solar period or towards the cleaner period and cheaper period and reduce peak demand during the nighttime. And then finally, there's this 3x period in red, which is the evening peak. This is when the sun goes down in the evening, so between 6 p.m. and roughly 9 p.m., which is how they've defined it. This is when the sun goes down, so solar generation is not available anymore. Everyone has gone home and they've switched on their electric devices, and so your net demand has increased. And so this is the period when electricity supply is most expensive, the system is most strained, and emissions are often the highest as well. So during this period, definitely want consumers to shift their consumption away to the extent possible or reduce their demand during this period. And so that's what the shape ends up looking like. And as you can see, it matches the top chart very well. And so this is the ultimate goal of time varying rates, to really align the costs of producing electricity with the cost of consuming electricity. Just to build up the sense of continuity here, these are the long-term rates that will require advanced metering infrastructure. They require AMI so that utilities are able to better understand when folks are consuming their electricity on this hourly or sub-hourly basis, just so they're able to then implement these rates. So this is the end of part one, which is just a sampling of the rate designs that we'll be exploring. And now on to part two, where I'll be talking about how we plan on understanding the impacts of these different rate designs on different customers. Thank you. So this first one, again, just to set up the motivating figure that we've been using here. It's helpful to look at a figure like this to better understand roughly the directional impacts of different changes, whether that's a rate design change or a rate difference or a technology change. But it obscures a lot of very important detail about the diversity of impacts, the diversity of energy burden embedded in here in these averages. There really is no one average household. What this snapshot represents is a multitude of homes with a multitude of experiences that we want to understand if we want to come up with the right rate design future for Massachusetts. And so to achieve that, next slide, please. E3 will be building up a model that's called the Household Energy Expenditure Model, or HEEM, to better understand what the impacts of rate design and electrification look like across a wide swath of customers, as well as understanding energy expenditure today. And so, again, a lot happening on this slide. So I will start by focusing on this set of characteristics at the bottom. What you see here is some important dimensions that really matter when it comes to understanding how energy expenditure varies from house to house, from home to home, family to family. And so on the left here, we have housing type, which really has a lot in it. So we have small single family homes with older vintages all the way to multifamily homes in buildings that have more than 5 units that are newer and are smaller, for example, and obviously all of the combinations within that. Vintage really matters because the level of insulation in a home really matters. And so if you have an old drafty home that is quite large, then if that household decides to adopt an electric device, they will likely face very significant electric bill impacts because of the lack of insulation, because of the additional heating demand that the heat pump will need to provide. Not only that, it's fairly likely that today they're paying untenable gas bills, for example, if that's an environmental justice community or low and moderate income household. We want to make sure we're capturing this dynamic to understand which pockets across the state are most at risk today and in the future. That's just one characteristic here. Other characteristics include region. Across the state, there's different weather patterns and therefore different heating and cooling needs. The next one is heating sources. So if a home is heated by gas today versus heated by electric resistance devices today versus heated by heating oil or propane, the current economics of heating are going to look very different from an electrified household economics of heating. And so we want to make sure that we capture what energy burden looks like today and what it'll look like under different rate paradigms in the future. I won't go through all of them, but I will talk a little bit more about this last one, which is the building electrification status. And so we want to better understand, again, what bills look like today without heat pumps, what they'd look like with a smaller heat pump, but retained fossil backup system, just so that we understand what that pathway looks like in terms of customer energy costs. And then finally, whole home electrification, where you install a cold climate heat pump, you install an EV, and you don't have any fossil usage left in your household. And so what this ends up looking like in practice is in the top right, where you no longer have just one average customer snapshot, but you have thousands of snapshots of representative customers where we're attempting to understand which specific customer groups are most at risk today because of the energy bills that they're paying, with whether it's electric or gas. What will that look like under different rate design paradigms? Meaning if you pull lever 1 versus pulling lever 2, how much does their monthly bill change? And making sure that we're understanding those impacts so that it informs rate design as well as informs the need for other programs, low income bill assistance, for example, and make sure that we're getting a holistic picture here. So that's our whirlwind introduction to what we'll be looking at and how we'll be looking at it. I will end with a couple of next steps from our end and then hand it back to Austin. Next slide, please. Thanks. So there's 3 that we're working on. The first is building up a database of rates in Massachusetts today. We're aiming to make this public facing. And so the goal here is to understand what are the different rates out there today. What are folks paying and how are they paying for it? Whether that's existing rates offered or pilots that are being considered, as well as how low income households are being offered discounts and what is the structure of those discounts across EDCs and MLPs. That's number 1. Number 2 is continuing to build up the scheme model so that we can understand what do bills look like today. How much are folks paying for gas? How much are folks paying for electricity across the state, across these different customer types, and really diving into detail there. And then finally, we are conducting a literature review of number 1, electrification-friendly rate structures being offered elsewhere in the country, just so that we can then learn from those offerings and try and absorb that knowledge here. And then number 2 is coming up with a more complete characterization of what are the existing technology, policy, and regulatory barriers and constraints and considerations that are shaping rate making in Massachusetts today, and which ones of those will need to change as we progress towards the rates of the future. So that's all we have today. Really excited to hear from you. And with that, I'll hand it back to Austin to talk a little bit more about stakeholder engagement. Thanks.
Thank you both to Andrew and Vivaan for that. We are able to now turn to the public comment period of this. So in a moment here, I'll invite folks if they are interested to raise their hand. That's the approach we're going to use tonight. And if you do have a comment or would like to make a statement, you will kind of handle the hand raised on a first come first served basis. I invite the E3 team to maybe answer some of the questions in the chat as they pertain to some of the decisions about what to include and what not to, or the things that the E3 team has just spoken about. I think we are looking good in terms of attendance and timing. So I would ask that you keep your comments to 2 to 3 minutes, and we can adjust as need be. But certainly longer form comments in the way of written comments are also welcome. And so we invite you to send those written comments to the email identified here on the slide. Just note that any public comments that are written will be considered public and may be posted on the IRWG's website. We will we'll end up with some just wrap up here. I really want to take this opportunity to thank you all again for your participation and comments today. We said it before, and it goes without saying again, that stakeholder engagement is critical to the development of this comprehensive study, as well as the effective recommendations that come from this process. So we really appreciate the start of this conversation today, and I think Larry kind of teed it up well, and certainly something we have thought intentionally about in this process, to start off with speaking to scope and work that needs to be done, rather than coming to you first after the work has been done, so that we can really be responsive and understand the issues at play here before we get too far down the road. So certainly welcome future written comments, and also wanted to flag that there will be future stakeholder opportunities, not only in these at-large public listening sessions, but also through more granular or further detailed subject matter specific topics. And right now we've tentatively kind of couched those as groups around consumer and advocacy, distributed generation and distributed energy resources, as well as the electric distribution companies and other utilities and suppliers in the space. Not necessarily to artificially create silos within those organizations, but to get further down into some of the nitty-gritty questions that must be answered, and to provide smaller groups to kind of get into those discussions more robustly. So if you are interested in participating in one of those groups, certainly welcome you to email the rates.wg@mass.gov with your name, title, organization, and email addresses of any interested parties. Certainly welcome, or certainly would appreciate the IRWG subgroup interest subject heading, so I can more quickly sort through my email. But following the meeting today, we'll be reaching out to collect those requests and reach out to establish meeting times, along with some greater detail on what the objectives of those sessions will be. And with that, I want to thank everyone again and look forward to hearing from and working with many of you throughout the rest of this year. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.